Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the recently released Thor by Jason Aaron Omnibus Volume 1. Now this is a book I'm hugely excited to have in my collection. It's a series that I had an absolute blast reading through when I went through it all the first time. I think it's just one of my favourite runs, to put it as simply as I can. Such a great story. This omnibus is collecting roughly the first half, pretty much exactly the first half, in fact, of Jason Aaron's full Thor run. So fingers crossed we get a second omnibus in the not too distant future to collect the rest of it, and then we can have this whole epic saga in a couple of great omnibuses. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Here and now, I've got Volume 1 to look at. This cover on the dust jacket here, which you also see underneath on the front, is a Russell Dortman cover featuring the female Thor. If we just take a look around the rest of this, then you get this light grey kind of colour scheme going on. Pretty unique compared to other omnibuses by Marvel. So Thor by Jason Aaron, artwork mainly by Russell Dortman and Esad Ribic. And you get your little icon down there of the female Thor again, with Volume 1. Depending on which just cover you get, you're going to get a little icon down there that will be different from the others. And on the back, instead of the usual kind of cover gallery that you often see on a Marvel omnibus, you get this selection of different panels and images from throughout the material collected in here. And your little blurb that states it's a tale of two Thors. So it really is. So it's the tale of Thor Odinson, the original Thor, the Thor really, and then this mysterious female Thor who turns up partway through the story. Down there you get your contents, so I won't read it all aloud, but feel free to pause and take a look. But as I say, this is, to break it down as simply as I can, about the first half of the whole Jason Aaron Thor saga. I'm going to give a spoiler warning here, because it's going to be very difficult for me to talk about this book as I flick through it and showcase some of the artwork without spoiling anything. And I enjoy it too much, really, to not at least talk about a few things. So whilst I won't go over everything, I do want to talk about a few key things, including who this is. So if you don't know who that is, fair warning at this point, just take a look on the back of the hardcover. You get this image here by, I believe, Joe Quesada. That's one of the DM variants as well. The other is the standard cover by Esad Ribic. So take a look inside. You've got these light grey bookend pages, and straight away we're seeing a Russell Dortman image here of this Thor. So as I said, I'm going to talk about who this is now. So final spoiler warning, but that female Thor is Jane Foster. Okay, the long-time supporting character of Thor. Partway through this story, circumstances make it so that she becomes worthy to wield Mjolnir during a period where Thor himself is not. And that whole thing caused a fair amount of controversy. But before we get to that point, there's this first series, Thor God of Thunder. And on each cover, you get the title of the story and the issue number. So it's cool to see that. And these first 25 issues, I believe all of it is illustrated by the great Esad Ribic, who gives it this really awesome, almost photorealistic style. Such a cool art style. And this is a brutal story. So this features a villain who's newly created by Jason Aaron for this run, called Gore the God Butcher. And this is brutal, honestly. There's quite a lot of violence and mature content really in here. What's really cool as well is that throughout this story, Jason Aaron does this really interesting thing, this cool technique of kind of switching between Thor at three different points in his life. So we've got Thor in the modern world, kind of present-day Thor. There's a Thor from the past, from around the 12th century, which is actually before he was even worthy of wielding Mjolnir. So he's got this battle axe and battle hammer. And a Thor from the distant future, at which point he is king of Asgard and looks a lot like Odin. He's basically become All-Father Thor at this point in the future. And these three Thors end up converging. There's a bit of time travel going on in this story, but it's really interesting to see the way that Aaron kind of juggles the story between past, present and future. I kind of thought at first it might not work. Like, I was a little bit concerned. That seemed a bit strange for me to have three timelines kind of running on parallel alongside each other within one story. It seemed like it was a risky move, but I can tell you that, at least in my opinion, Aaron pulled it off really well. Unexpectedly well for me at the time when I first read it. But yeah, just some really cool, great things go on. So like you see in here on this cover, the three Thors do kind of temporarily team up at certain points to take on this Gore character. And he's a really powerful, sinister, creepy, villainous dude. Really good villain created in this story here. Like, immediately kind of becomes iconic. Quite rare that you get a newly created character who sort of immediately cements themselves as one of the great villains or heroes, whoever they might be. But I think Gore takes the mantle as being one of those. But really just a lot of cool artwork in here, as I say, a lot of great stories. I think the Gore story, at least the original Gore story, takes up about the first half of this first series. Now, if you took a look at the content on the back, or you've seen it elsewhere, and as I look through this book as well, we'll see some of examples of it, but what happens confusingly during this time at Marvel in general, not just with Thor, but there was a lot of regular renumbering of series. So, you know, with this series, it goes to 25, then it renumbers to number 1, and that goes to issue 8, then it renumbers to number 1 again, and we get the first 12 issues of that series. And this was something that Marvel kept doing during this era, and I just can't understand why, because it's so confusing to even, I think, people who've been reading comics for a while, never mind newcomers. Like, you don't know where you're starting, especially since the number 1s aren't exactly brand new stories. They're carrying on previously told stories, you know? So in here, each time you jump to a number 1, which happens 3 times in this omnibus alone, it's not like it's 3 separate stories. It is all part of the same story. It's just that Marvel, and I guess comics in general, can be confusing. But from an early stage in here, what we start to see is the appearance of Malekith the Accursed, who is a dark elf originally created by Walter Simonson in his classic run on Thor, which is another Thor run I really need to talk about one of these days. And I don't think really Malekith, who is seen here, is a character who had really been utilised very much since Simonson's run, which at this point, you know, was like 40 years ago nearly, and about 30 years before this run started. But Jason Aaron kind of brought him in and made him a central focus of this story, really the key antagonist, and from an early stage we start to get the foreshadowing of an upcoming War of Realms. So you may well have heard of the War of the Realms event. It does have its own omnibus, which is available now with a second printing having just been released. I like this Lego Loki. That comes at the end of this run, pretty much. The very end of Jason Aaron's run culminates in the War of the Realms. It's a huge, massive event, really, that covers most of the Marvel Universe. And it is an integral part of this story. So I know that one of the questions that's kind of out there amongst people at the moment is how much, if any, of the War of the Realms, given that that omnibus is already out in its own right, would be included at the end, or I mean in the second volume of Jason Aaron's Thor. My opinion is that it would likely be the whole main series, the whole, you know, event series itself of War of the Realms, which I think is 7 issues, and the key Thor issues as well that tie in so heavily to it. Probably all the crossover stuff would be left out, but I think the main event itself would surely be in a second volume of this. Introduction of a few different characters here. So this character who comes in, and she is a member of S.H.I.E.L.D. She becomes quite a regular supporting character. This original series, this Esad Ribic illustrated series, the God of Thunder series, which has 25 issues, this takes about the first half of this omnibus. This character, I really like her, Agent Solomon. Roz Solomon, I think is her full name. Yeah, she becomes really cool. She's kind of introduced and you think like she might just be a brief character who doesn't stick around for very long, but then she does, and that's very cool. But yeah, we're not even at the point yet where we see Jane Foster turn up as Thor, although we're getting there. This is cool. So this is an extract from Original Sin. This is quite important to include in here. Original Sin was really a totally unrelated event for the most part, but I think it was written by Jason Aaron. And it's important to include here because this includes the pages where we see what happens to Thor that renders him unworthy of lifting Mjolnir. Basically, he gets something whispered in his ear, and that alone, something that is said to him that is so impactful that it shakes his entire self-belief, self-confidence, and his self-worth, really. And it just shakes him to the core, to the point of he no longer ends up being worthy of wielding Mjolnir, basically. He kind of, like I say, has a bit of an identity crisis, really. And it's at this point that we see Thor kind of go off in one direction, and dramatically, somebody else comes and lifts the hammer. So this is where we see Thor renumbered to number 1 for the first time. This is an 8-issue series. That's the cover, of course, to the DM variant. At this point, we're seeing artwork by Russell Dauterman, who is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I really like Ribich's work, but the Dauterman work is just stunning. This is honestly some of my favourite artwork that I think I've ever seen. It works so well with the colours as well. It's just a great combination, I think, of art style plus colouring. Just gives it a really unique look. We get this dramatic splash page of Thor being lifted. And initially this was a big mystery as to who she is. You know, you don't find out straight away. You don't find out for a while, actually. And yeah, I've said that, of course, it turns out to be Jane Foster. I kind of feel like you need to have been living under a rock for years at this point not to know that, even if you've never read this run. I knew it was her years before I'd read any of this, because it was all over the news at the time. People were making a big fuss about it, like, you know, can't believe they've replaced Thor with a girl. Can't help but feel that a lot of the people who made that criticism never read any of this run, because within the context of the story, it works really well. And it's quite clear from the beginning that there was never an intention of permanently replacing Thor with a female Thor, you know. Great cover there. There is a specific reason as to why it's quite clear that she would only ever be able to be Thor temporarily. And it's a great story, honestly, really cool. And the thing is, Thor himself is not sidelined completely. It's not like he vanishes from his own series. He has still got his own story arc going on during this time. Basically, his story becomes one of redemption. So Jane Foster as Thor is pretty much just kind of keeping the hammer warm, so to speak, I suppose you could say, whilst Thor himself goes on a journey of redemption, I suppose, trying to restore his own confidence and sense of self-worth. And at the same time, you get, you know, this Agent Solomon here just consistently appearing as a supporting character, and she's got her own story arc going on. She's kind of got a romantic relationship with Thor, so she's a bit devastated when he vanishes. But yeah, so Thor goes off, does his own thing, and in the meantime, you get Jane Foster Thor doing her own stuff and doing some really cool stuff. This is Jane Foster as well. I suppose I might as well touch briefly on the fact that we find out that she is suffering from cancer. So every time she wields Mjolnir, Mjolnir's magical effects purge any kind of poisonous elements from her body, and because she's going through chemotherapy, which is technically a kind of poison, it purges the effects of the chemotherapy from her body. So every time she wields Mjolnir and then lets go of it again and reverts to herself, she's effectively more ill than she was when she picked it up, because her treatments are being nullified every time. And that's a really cool idea, because it means that as Thor, she's so strong and mighty. So the minute she stops being Thor, she's incredibly weak. You know, it's these kind of polar opposites. And we know that because of that effect, she can't be Thor forever without it killing her. Really interesting setup, and all pays off in a really cool way in the end. Of course, that will be in Volume 2. This really only takes us to the midway point, as I already said. I think what's happening here is Thor kind of does this sort of Lord of the Rings thing. He creates this team called the League of Realms, which is made up of one member of the different realms of the 9 realms. So like you've got a light elf, you get a dwarf, can't remember who else, but basically like one of a few different races that make this team up, and they're kind of going on their own mission to try and stop Malekith's forces. Malekith is behind the scenes a lot of the time here, plotting. He's establishing his own army, creating alliances between some of the more kind of classic evil characters, like the fire demons of Muspelheim, the dark elves, of course. Yeah, alliances are being forged on both sides, and war is brewing. You know it's coming. I like how Loki is drawn throughout here as well as how he's presented. Loki, pretty complex character during this time. But some of this artwork, though, I've got to praise it again. It just looks so great, you know. Really like Dortmund's style. So glad that he drew as much of this stuff as he did. If you've never read this run before, and you've got any interest in Thor, I definitely recommend reading this. I would say this is new reader friendly as well for the most part, because I hadn't read any Thor in terms of stuff that took place leading up to this run at all. You know, I haven't read huge amounts of Thor, but I had no issues with this. Also, what's cool is that there are quite a few little Easter eggs and homages paid to some elements of Walter Simonson's run. That run's not really necessary reading either, I should say, to understand this, but I think it's just necessary reading in general. It's one of those runs that's must read for me, and I think Jason Aaron thinks so, because there's a few little Easter eggs in here now and then, which if you've read Simonson's run and if you're familiar with it, you'll probably get a little laugh out of. Just nice little homages, as I say. Nothing essential, but cool little tributes. This dude as well, he's appeared probably a few times on the pages up to this point as I flick through, but Dario Agga also becomes a key antagonist. He's the CEO of the Roxxon Corporation, one of those classic evil corporations that exist within the Marvel Universe. Out to do pretty much anything to make a profit. There's nothing too immoral or even illegal that the corporation won't manage to find a way around if it'll make them a penny. And he's the leader, so he's kind of this, you know, just kind of an asshole. And he gets recruited by Malekith as well, brought onto the dark side as such. This is a great run. Oh my god, I can't believe how much fun this is, really. It's so cool. Getting to the end of what's collected in here, this goes up to Mighty Thor issue 12. Mighty Thor is the second Thor series that features Jane Foster. You've got that first one, which is 8 issues. This next one, which has the first 12 issues in here. I like what they do with Mjolnir as well. This might sound silly, but even Mjolnir, the hammer, gets a character arc in a way. Turns out there's more to Mjolnir than anybody ever realised up to this point. I like that they include all these little variants throughout as well. I haven't really mentioned that so far, but you may well have seen a few examples. That Lego Loki, that was one of them. But it's cool that they include those kind of throughout. So I think if we get a second volume, it would have to collect the rest of this series. It would probably also collect the Unworthy Thor series, which features Thor himself, the main Thor, and shows what he's doing during some of this. And then probably the War of the Realms stuff, as I mentioned, and the final Thor issue as well, when he gets renumbered again and returns to featuring the Odinson. And then probably as well the King Thor miniseries, which was a 4-issue series which kind of served as an epilogue to Aaron's whole run. Now, can't tell you how impatient I am already to get that second volume. There's no confirmation of it yet, so it's probably going to be at least about a year away until it comes out, unfortunately. I like these character designs here by Dortmund. But yeah, it can't come soon enough for me. Can't wait for the day that I have all of this run collected in omnibus format. I'm probably not going to pick up the War of the Realms, if anybody's curious about that, as to whether I might cover that. Just because I am very sure that the main event would end up being in a second volume of this. And I don't like all of the tie-in stuff to War of the Realms enough to really justify buying the omnibus for just those. Really cool Arthur Adams cover here. This was going to be a DM variant cover for the omnibus. I would have quite liked that. But certainly not unhappy with the options we ended up getting. A lot of cool character pin-ups in here though. Different covers, variant covers. That's really nice, like an ant-sized variant, like a little Ant-Man joke. Throg, what a great character. The Frog Thor, again, another reference to the Simonson era. This is cool by Dale Keown. All these variants though, some great artists, some great stuff collected in the back. And overall, a great omnibus. Hopefully, this has given you some idea of what this run is maybe like. Oh, this is cool. A Walt Simonson variant. Yeah, if you haven't read this run before, I hope I've maybe been able to give some insight as to what it's like, as to whether or not it's worth picking up. let me know, though, your thoughts on the run. If it is something you regard as highly as I do, I've kind of done nothing but praise it here. But I just really enjoy it so much, and the only letdown for me, as like I say, I mentioned and touched upon it already, is that we don't yet know when we're going to get Volume 2. But that's really not a criticism. I'm sure it will come. But yeah, I really can't wait to dive back into this stuff again. I probably will reread it again soon, and then maybe have to read the rest of it digitally, because I won't be able to patiently wait for a second volume for that if I start reading it from the beginning again. But yeah, as always, thanks for watching, guys. Do let me know your thoughts on this book, on this run, and I'll be back again soon with something else.